Salam and peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. This is episode 6, part 1. My friend, welcome back. In this episode, we are going to attempt something that, if we are right, may count as one of the most radical moves in the history of human thought. We are not just going to describe the universe. We are going to propose that there is a single underlying logad behind everything you see and feel. And we are going to try to show you that language in a way you can actually follow. We will call it the language of phase and its derivatives, the Holophase code. But before we start naming symbols and structures, I want to begin in a very different place. Not in a laboratory, not in an equation, but at a loom. Because this episode, episode 6, is not only about a new scientific model. It is about something that took shape in my life over decades, a transfer of skill from one world into another. From the world of rug weaving under very hard conditions into the world of modern science. What we are going to do now is not sentimental. It is about structure, about pattern, about code. It is about seeing that the same kind of intelligence can live in completely different materials. Once in silk threads and knots, and later in information and phase. If we do this carefully, by the time you reach the end of episode 6, you will not only have heard the phrase code of existence, you will be able to speak its language. This first part is to explain why I believe such a code might even exist, and why I think I was trained to look for it long before I knew what physics was. Then in part 2, we will start properly from the beginning, phase itself. What it is, how it behaves, and why its derivatives can carry the whole structure of reality. For now, let's go to Kabul. As a child, I spent much of my life at a loom in Kabul, Afghanistan. I was around 7 when this began. Rug weaving was not a hobby. It was not an afternoon craft activity. It was work. Long hours, strict rules, high expectations. The loom was a simple wooden frame, but what it demanded from you was not simple at all. You sat in front of a forest of vertical threads, and you tied knot after knot, row after row, following a pattern that someone else had designed. The pattern told you exactly which color had to go where, and in what order. The rules were clear. If you made a mistake, the pattern did not forgive you. After several hard slaps, often in the face and back of the neck from the supervisor and some tears, you had to untie and redo it. The rug did not care if you were tired or bored or sad. The language of knots had no patience for excuses. There was another rule. You were not allowed to talk while you worked. No conversation to pass the time, no chatting with other children, no telling stories. The outside world became very quiet. On the outside, it was a room full of silence and small movements. On the inside, in my mind, something else was happening. Most people who come to see a rug see something bright and finished. They see flowers, borders, medallions, shapes, colors, symmetry. They feel texture under their hand. They see a complete object, a beautiful surface. But a weaver does not see the same thing. We are looking at the same rug, but we are not seeing the same reality. The visitor sees the final picture. I see the code behind it. When I look at a rug as a weaver, I see rows of knots, tight and regular, each knot sitting exactly in its place on a grid. Each color change marking a decision in a strict combinatorial language. I see the rhythm of rows, the logic of borders, the rules of how a curve is built from tiny squares, how a diagonal is faked by clever staircases of knots. I see the mistakes I made and fixed, the near mistakes I caught at the last moment, the places where the pattern pushed me to the limit of my attention. So, already as a child, I was living inside two different views of the same object. The visitor's view, what a beautiful rug. The weaver's view, what a complex code of knots, patterns, and rules. Both views are correct, but they live at different layers. The rug taught me this very early. The same visible reality can be read in different ways, depending on what language you know. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a question began to form, even if I couldn't fully express it at the time. What if existence itself is like this? What if the world we see, the trees, the people, the cities, the stars, is like the visible side of a rug, and somewhere beneath it there is a hidden code, a pattern language that only the weaver sees? At that time, this was just a vague feeling, an intuition with no clear shape. But it stayed with me. The conditions in the workshop were strict and tiring. We were not allowed to speak while we worked, and the hours were long. So my mind needed something to hold on to stay alive. That is how another form of training began, almost by accident. There was a window near the loom. Through that window, I could see the outside world. The mountains surrounding Kabul, broken walls, rooftops, trees, branches, leaves, birds crossing the sky. I started playing a game with myself. I would pick a shape outside, a bent branch, a torn edge of a wall, the outline of a distant mountain, and I would ask, if I had to weave this shape into the rug, how would I do it? On the outside, it was just a way to kill boredom. On the inside, it was an intense exercise. The world outside the window was continuous, irregular, wild. The rug beneath my hands was discrete, regular, constrained. To bring one into the other, I had to translate. How do you turn a curved mountain ridge into stairs of knots? How do you turn a complicated branch into a pattern that still feels like that branch, but fits the rules of the rug? At first, I chose simple shapes because they were easier to translate. But slowly, I started to search for more challenging ones. I would look for the most complex shapes I could find. A cluster of twisted branches, a broken wall with cracks and shadows, a group of leaves all moving differently in the wind. Then I would think silently. Let's see if the pattern language can handle this. Let's see if I can encode this shape using only knots, rows, and colors. You could say these were children's games, but they were also something deeper. They were training my mind to see the world as something that can be mapped into a strict, limited code. Again and again, for years, I was doing a kind of one-way experiment. Take reality, compress it into a pattern, force it through the constraints of a fixed language. I did not have the words representation or encoding or information. I just had a loom, a window, and a brain that refused to go numb. But looking back, it is clear that I was already learning to think like someone who believes that there might be a code beneath appearances. There is another relationship I discovered in those years, one that later became crucial for Holophase. I began to notice that a pattern never meant the same thing in every context. Take a simple motif, a small flower shape. Place it at the center of the rug, it becomes a focal point, a symbol of attention. Repeat it along the border, it becomes a rhythm, a heartbeat, a frame. Use a certain color in a field of dark tones, that color shouts. Use the same color in a bright field, the same color now whispers. The pattern has not changed, the context has, and yet the meaning is completely different. I saw this again and again. The context shapes the pattern shapes the context. They give meaning to each other. A border sets the style of a central field. A central motif can calm or energize everything around it. A small asymmetry can change the entire mood of the rug. Pattern and context were not separate. They were locked together in a kind of dance. You cannot understand one without the other. You cannot define one without looking at the other. This became one of the deepest lessons of my time as a weaver. Nothing means anything on its own. Meaning is always relational. Later, when I was building the Holophase model, this lesson came back with full force. In Holophase, we talk about phase patterns in windows, about derivatives, about semantic encoders like presence, identity, multiplicity, relation, change, persistence, causation. All of them depend on context. A single phase value means almost nothing. A derivative by itself means almost nothing. What matters is how these values and derivatives sit inside the larger pattern over space and time. The old weaving intuition that pattern and context define each other became a guiding principle for the model. In the rug, the threads and the surrounding motifs define each other's meaning. In holophase, the local pattern of phi and its surrounding patterns define each other's meaning. The material is different, the structure is the same. As the years went by, I left the loom physically, but it never really left me. The way I looked at the world had been shaped by that duel with pattern. Where other people might see a landscape, I would see possible decompositions into shapes, symmetries, rhythms. Where others might see a finished object, I would ask myself, what is the weave behind this? What is the code that, if I knew it, would let me rebuild this from scratch? At the same time, the world around me changed. I was no longer limited to that one room, that one loom. I gained access to books, to mathematics, to physics, to the internet. I learned about energy, space-time, fields, quantum mechanics. And as I read, attention started to grow. On the one hand, modern science is incredibly successful. It predicts, explains, and controls. It builds technology. It lands machines on comets. It manipulates light and matter with precision. On the other hand, something felt familiar from my weaving days. When physicists talk about energy, fields, and spacetime, they are often talking about what I now think of as the finished rug. They describe the visible structure of reality, how things move, how forces act, how spacetime curves. They see the flowers, the borders, the overall image. It is powerful, it is beautiful, but it might not be the deepest layer. The weaver in me kept whispering, is this the pattern or just the surface? Where are the knots? Where is the underlying language from which this picture is woven? I had a strong feeling that we were still visitors in the rug shop, admiring the design, but we had not yet gone around the back of the loom. I began to wonder, what would the universe look like to a weaver of existence? What would its knots be? What would its pattern language be? What are the rules that, if you know them, let you build everything we see? Time, space, motion, particles, forces, fields, information, even meaning. This question became the center of my life. For about 15 years, I tried to answer it. If the weaving years were my first duel with pattern, these 15 years were the second. The same battle, but at a much higher level. This time the threads were no longer silk or wool. They were concepts. Phase, derivatives, information, geometry, topology. This time the loom was no longer wood and string. It was a mix of mathematics, numerical experiments, physical theories, and digital tools. Again and again, I tried to build a complete pattern language for existence. Again and again, my early attempts collapsed. Some versions were too loose. They could not make sharp predictions. Some versions were too narrow. They could not handle the richness of reality. Some versions were beautiful on paper, but fell apart when tested against data or logic. Each collapse was painful, but each one forced me to refine the language. Just like untying rows of knots and retying them, I had to take entire structures apart and start again. Over time, one idea kept returning, stronger each time. Reality might be woven from a single cyclic quantity, a phase, and its derivatives. Not energy as the substance, but energy as a summary of something deeper. Not spacetime as the absolute stage, but spacetime as a pattern emerging from more basic relations. Not objects as fundamental, but objects as stable patterns in a more primitive field. This idea grew into what we now call the holophase model. In the same way my childhood weaving took simple knots and turned them into complex designs, the holophase model takes one simple ingredient, phase, phi, and tries to show how its derivatives can generate the entire rug of reality. In the process, two key scientific papers crystallized out of this long struggle. The first is called The Essence of the Holophase, a complete empirical semantic foundation for a phi-closed world. This paper does something very precise. It says, let us assume that the universe is phi-closed. That means everything we can honestly observe in a finite region, with real instruments under real constraints, can be written as a functional of phi and its derivatives in that region. The paper shows how to define this carefully, how to tie it to actual measurement, how to encode basic conceptual building blocks like presence, identity, multiplicity, relation, change, persistence, causation, in terms of phase patterns and their derivatives. It is rigorous, technical, and already uploaded to Zenodo for the world to see and challenge. The second paper is called The Holophase as Ontic Substrate, the Derivative Atlas as the Complete Code of Existence. This one goes further. It says, if phi is the ontic substrate, the stuff of reality, then its derivatives form a complete derivative atlas. This atlas is the codebook. It tells you how local rhythms of phase create time, space, and motion as different readouts. It shows how higher derivatives encode curvature, forces, and dynamics. It shows how defects in the phase field can behave as particles, vortices, or charges. It shows how geometry, causal structure, and multi-scale organization can emerge from patterns in phi. That second paper is now being finalized as I speak these words. It is the technical backbone of what we are about to explore together in this episode. Episode 6 is the audio journey through the ideas embedded in these two papers. Not as formulas on a page, but as a language you can carry in your mind. So where are we now? We stand at the threshold where two very different worlds meet. On one side, a childhood spent weaving rugs in Kabul, living inside a strict pattern language, seeing objects in terms of knots, grids, and rules that the visitor never suspects. On the other side, the entire modern project of physics and information theory, trying to understand what reality is made of and how it behaves. Holophase is what happens when the skill from one world is transferred and recomposed in the other. The material changes. Silk threads become phase values and informational distinctions. The wooden loom becomes a mathematical and experimental framework. The rug becomes the universe itself. But the core act, reading and writing patterns according to a deep code, stays the same. In rug weaving, I learned what it means to see a finished surface and ask, what is the hidden language that built this? In Holophase, I ask the same question about existence. Given the dazzling surface of reality, galaxies, atoms, minds, societies, what is the hidden language that could have woven all this? The bet we are making is that this language is a single cyclic phase field, phi, and the structured hierarchy of its derivatives. This first part of episode 6 has been about giving you the right angle of approach. I do not want you to hear the phrase code of existence as a marketing slogan. I want you to understand that for me, this is a very specific kind of claim. That reality has a weaver's side and a visitor's side. That what we usually call physics mostly describes the finished rug, the side that visitors admire. And that there may be a deeper description, closer to the loom, closer to the pattern language itself, where everything is written in terms of phase and its derivatives. In the rug, the weaver's language is not visible in the final picture, but it is absolutely necessary to create it. In the holophase model, the code of existence is not directly visible in our ordinary experience, but it may be the necessary structure that generates that experience. In this sense, episode 6 is our attempt to walk you around the back of the loom of reality. From the next part onward, we will leave biography behind and move step by step through the actual language. In part 2, we will start with the simplest element, phase itself. We will ask, what is phase conceptually? Why is it cyclic? What does it mean to say that every point in the universe carries a phase value? How can such a simple thing give rise to something as rich as time, space, motion, and matter? Then we will climb the ladder. First derivatives, second derivatives, the entire derivative atlas, the rules that govern how these derivatives can change, the way defects, geometry, dynamics, information, and meaning arise from them. We will go from the lowest level, the local dial that can turn, to the highest level, the full code that can write galaxies and conversations. By the end of episode 6, if we succeed, you will not only have heard about phase and its derivatives, you will be able to think with them. You will see the world the way a weaver sees a rug, not only as a surface of shapes and colors, but as the expression of a deeper language with its own laws and grammar. That is the journey we are about to begin. When you are ready, let's step into part 2 and start from the ground up, with Phi itself.